It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. Police in Honduras have arrested David Castillo. He is an executive of Daysa, the hydroelectric company in western Honduras, at the heart of the battle with local population resisting the construction of a dam. Castillo is being accused of being the mastermind behind the assassination of environmental activist Berta Cáceres. Armed gunmen murdered Berta Cáceres and wounded a fellow activist in her house exactly 2 years ago. This is the 9th arrest in the case, which has garnered international attention because Cáceres was a prominent figure in Honduras. Here's what Berta Cáceres' mother, Oscar Flores, had to say just prior to the arrest at a protest on the 2nd anniversary of her daughter's murder.
Today we're asking that they sentence those that are in prison. I believe there are 8, and that they capture their masterminds. And also that internationally, the government of Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez is not recognized, because not only is he an imposter, but he also permits these murders in this country.
Joining me now to analyze the significance of this arrest is Jesse Freeston. Jesse is an independent documentary filmmaker and the director of Resistencia, a film about the 2009 coup in Honduras against President Manuel Zelaya. Thanks for joining me, Jesse.
My pleasure.
Jesse, you were close to Berta Cáceres and her family. What is your reaction to the arrest of the Daysa executive, Roberto Castillo?
So, Roberto David Castillo was the last name that Berta Cáceres mentioned when she was talking about how her life was under threat. 2 days before she was killed, she met with Honduran filmmaker Katia Lara and wrote down David Castillo's name in Katia's notebook as somebody that Katia should be trying to get an interview with to talk about the threats on Berta's life that Berta was receiving, and 2 days later she was assassinated. So if we just go with the evidence that Berta herself left for us, then David Castillo was at the top of the list from day one. It took 2 years for him to be detained or to be questioned in any way, despite all kinds of other evidence against him as well, which we hope will be revealed in the coming months. But this system here is extremely slow. So, for example, the first 7 arrests in the case, which we should point out, came as a result of a lot of national and international pressure from everywhere, from the family itself, from Berta's mother, who you just saw, to her children, to the community, to the national community, and the international community. Even Leonardo DiCaprio famously, one of his first tweets after winning the Oscar was that he wanted justice for Berta Cáceres. So that led to the police up until then were saying that this was a crime of passion, and that they were looking into Berta's former husband and Berta's most recent boyfriend as the probable executors of the assassination. Recently, news has come out that there was actually a video that the police have had since day one that was actually from the police post nearest to Berta's house that showed a bunch of men, masked men in a pickup truck. So it wasn't just like one angry boyfriend or something. And nonetheless, despite them having had that information, their original thesis that they went after was that this was a crime of passion of these boyfriends. When it was clear that the national and international pressure was not going to accept that, then they arrested the trigger people. But the family has been at the forefront from the beginning and saying, like, we know there's trigger people. That's not necessarily helping us. We know it wasn't the billionaires that went in with a gun and killed Berta Cáceres. We want who ordered it. We want the people behind it, and we want this project ended. Because if it had any legitimacy, and they said it had no legitimacy from the beginning because it didn't have prior and informed consent from the indigenous Lenca people of the region, while it does have quite a bit of support in the region, I can definitely say that. We've actually seen marches in the area asking for David Castillo to be released, although it seems like one has to question, and one would wonder, especially given how things work in this country, whether or not the people in the streets are being paid to be in the streets. That, as yet, I haven't investigated that myself. But I'm just saying that it's a conflictual thing. And so there may have been an argument for some legitimacy of this dam, but at the point where you start killing those who oppose it, Now the family says you have to scrap that dam. That has not happened. Not only has it not happened nationally with this government, which the translation of what Berta's mother said in that video clip was imposter, which reads is more like usurper, would be like a better translation, maybe somebody who's taken power by force or is holding on to it by force. And so that's the situation right now. And that government has not in any way canceled this dam project that Berta gave her life for. But there is some European financing from FinFund in Finland and a Dutch development bank that are on pause, as far as I'm aware right now. But they also have not canceled their involvement with the project. They've just temporarily put it on pause. So I think the fact that 2 years later that financing was still on pause, this would be my thesis, this is not a fact necessarily, the fact that that financing was still on pause 2 years later, it led this regime to say, okay, we need to take another step. We need to at least detain David Castillo. And David Castillo, it's very important to note, is trained at West Point in the United States, a very, very well-trained intelligence operative who's been working both for the company and for the Honduran intelligence agency on and off. He, from all reports from the region, is considered a very dangerous man. And also behind Berta's case are a lot of other cases of people who have been killed, like Tomas Garcia, or even journalist Felix Molina, who was forced to flee the country after 2 months after Berta's assassination. Felix reported on some documents that he obtained about the activity of military people within Daysa, people like David Castillo, and that they might have been involved, calling it paramilitarism. And so Felix was shot within hours of posting that on Facebook. So Felix says that he knows very well that David Castillo knew about his movements inside the region, for example. So there might be more cases than just Berta that have to do with this man, David Castillo. But the family is still calling for the people above David Castillo, because David Castillo is not the man who stood to make millions and millions of dollars from this project. He's still an employee. And the name that's been floated around mostly at this point in terms of who's really at the top of this whole thing is the Atala family, which is one of the few billionaire families in Honduras. And their name was just mentioned by none other than Julio Arbizu, a very well-respected Peruvian lawyer who was the second in command of the International Anti-Corruption Commission, who just resigned under pressure from the OAS. And on his way out, he mentioned the Atala family as most likely being behind this Daysa project.
So Jesse, if 9 people have been arrested so far related to the murder of Berta Cáceres, would one come to the conclusion that President Juan Orlando Hernandez is truly intent on bringing those who murdered Cáceres to justice, including this family that you just mentioned?
I mean, Juan Orlando Hernandez doesn't really talk about Berta Cáceres, and ideally, this would be a situation where, you know, it wouldn't matter who was president. I mean, if essentially this is supposed to be a republic, and the judiciary should be operating, and the police as well, should be operating outside of politics and should be operating outside of the executive, of which Juan Orlando Hernandez is the head. But it's pretty clear that's not how things work here. Juan Orlando Hernandez's personal connection is unclear. It's definitely in his region of influence of the country. His base of power, where he comes from, is Western Honduras, which is the same area. But yeah, in terms of his own personal perspectives or his influence in the situation, I think those are the details that the family wants. You know, this is the kind of thorough investigation that the family wants. They want to know how high up this goes. They want to know what role the president played in it. They want to know what role the Atala family plays in it. And they want justice.
Jesse, as far as we know, there's a number of other independent investigations that are going on, one by The Guardian, one group of lawyers commissioned by COPEN, that's the organization Cáceres founded. They all conducted investigations. What did they find? Well,
they found a lot of unturned stones. For example, I forget what the amount is, but there's thousands of phone calls that have been recorded that need to be listened to. So it's like there's an abundance of work here that can be done to help untangle this situation. There's just not enough people to do it as it stands, and not enough people with access, with security access. So, for example, the Anti-Corruption Commission, which was recently basically defanged by the same Organization of American States that it came out of, in an act of international corruption that we still don't know the roots of, but the president of the OAS, Almagro, just basically fired the leads of the Anti-Corruption Commission only when they started to name names and publish documentation about what was going on. That Anti-Corruption Commission is seriously understaffed. They only have about 10 to 12 people doing actual investigation, which in comparison to a comparable country like Guatemala, where they have 85 in the International Corruption Commission. But they did take on Berta Cáceres' case and actually appointed one of probably the world's most famous and respected lawyers in cases like this, Almudena Bernabeu, who's a Catalonian lawyer who's taken on some really big cases like the Rios Montt case in terms of the Guatemalan genocide, as well as the assassination of the 6 Jesuit priests in El Salvador in the 80s, 1989. She's taken on, and now she's doing a lot of work in Syria right now. Anyway, she's taken on the Berta Cáceres case as a money laundering case because the Anti-Corruption Commission can only deal in questions of corruption. There's a lot of evidence right now, and that's why the Anti-Corruption Commission picked this up, that this dam project is perhaps above all a drug money laundering project. And so they're taking on the case from that, through that door in terms of criminality, but are also hoping along the way to uncover more about the involvement in Berta's assassination.
Jesse, earlier you mentioned there might be more people who've been murdered, killed by certain groups, people associated with this company in particular, or is it in general? Because according to a report by Global Witness, they say that Honduras is the deadliest country in the world for environmental activists. Over 120 environmental activists were killed in Honduras between 2010 and 2016. So what is the situation for environmental activists in general? And then do you suspect that this particular dam and Daysa in particular have been involved in more of those cases?
There's a couple cases that Daysa looks immediately implicated in. One is Tomas Garcia, who was also a member of COPIN, who was shot and killed by a military soldier, actually, part of the engineering wing of the military, while defending the construction of the dam from a COPIN action. So that's definitely one case. I would urge people to, when they see that statistic, that is a great piece of work by a Global Witness, that the term environmental is a little misleading on that point. The people that have lost their lives in Honduras are land defenders or territory defenders. This is not like, for example, and I'm not saying this in a pejorative way, but it's not people who are going around trying to raise awareness about climate change or something like this. This is people that have either taken land or are defending land they already work on or live on. The vast majority of those 121, I believe is the number, defenders that are assassinated were in the Aguan Valley, where it was the recuperation, in the words of the farmers themselves, of 10,000 or more acres of palm oil plantations from one of the richest families in the country. So I would encourage people to think to when they see that word environmental, to swap it out for land or territory.
All right, Jesse, I thank you so much for joining us today and giving us this insight from the ground there. I look forward to hearing from you again as this case proceeds.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And thank you for joining us here on the Real News Network.